The night had fallen beautifully over the bustling African city, and the Grand Hotel stood like a jewel under the velvet sky, its chandeliers glowing from within as guests in sleek modern attire filled the ballroom with laughter, wine, and whispers of wealth. At the center of it all stood Quame, a tall, dark-skinned entrepreneur, whose arrogance was as sharp as the tuxedo hugging his frame. Tonight was his night. Not just to celebrate his business but to crush his ex-wife once and for all, for he had invited every influential name in the city, not to honor her, but to disgrace her in the cruelest way possible. He whispered to his closest allies, his tone dripping with venom, telling them that when Amara entered, he would finally expose her as broken, forgotten, and desperate, a woman who had no place in the world without him. He smirked as he adjusted his cufflinks, sipping his wine with the confidence of a man certain of his victory, but little did he know that fate had written a script far different from his. The guests exchanged whispers in hushed tones, their curiosity sharp and restless, wondering if Amara would dare to step into the hall knowing the storm that awaited her, some scoffing that she would never risk the humiliation, others secretly hoping she would rise from the shadows to confront the man who had wronged her. Then, as the clock struck 9, the sound of an engine roared outside, low and powerful, and every head turned as a black Rolls Royce Phantom glided smoothly to the hotel entrance, its chrome grille shining like silver fire beneath the moonlight, casting a glow that silenced the hall. Murmurs raced like wildfire across the room. Whose car was it? What kind of presence would demand such grandeur? And could it truly be hers? The chauffeur stepped out quickly, polished and precise, opening the rear door with reverence, and out stepped Amara, the woman Quame thought he had buried beneath shame, a tall and radiant black African queen whose presence seemed to command the night itself, her every movement confident, graceful, and full of quiet fire. The crowd gasped, for she was not alone. Holding her hand and clinging to her gown were 3 beautiful children, triplets, whose innocent faces glowed with joy as their small footsteps echoed across the marble floor, making the silence heavier, sharper, and unforgettable. The band stopped playing, conversations died mid-sentence, and even the glasses of wine trembled in the hands of startled guests. For this was no woman returning to beg, but a woman returning with power, with legacy, and with a story greater than any lie Quame had ever told. Quame himself froze, the arrogance slipping from his eyes as his smirk vanished, his fingers tightening around his glass until it nearly cracked, his voice caught in his throat as he whispered, "Impossible. This cannot be real." Yet real it was, for Amara did not even spare him a glance as she walked into the hall with the poise of a woman who had nothing left to fear, her triplets running ahead, their laughter bouncing against the marble walls as guests slowly began to rise to their feet, clapping in awe, not for Quame, but for the woman he had underestimated and abandoned. A few years ago, she had been left in ruins, cast aside by a man who declared she would never survive without his wealth, mocked by those who believed she was finished, but instead of breaking, Amara had built herself anew. She had worked endless nights, studied business with fierce determination, and created her own fashion empire that grew from a single small boutique into one of the most admired luxury brands in the country. The very gown she wore tonight was not just a garment but a symbol of victory stitched from tears, sweat, and resilience, each thread carrying the story of her rise from ashes. And here she was, arriving not in defeat but in triumph, driving a Rolls Royce she had bought with her own success, bringing with her not only wealth but the undeniable evidence of her future, her children, her legacy, her pride. The hall buzzed with whispers of disbelief turning into admiration, and as Amara raised her hand to acknowledge the applause, Quame's friends shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze, realizing the trap he had set had closed on himself instead. For how could he shame a woman who had walked in stronger than ever, glowing with dignity and commanding respect with every step she took? Amara finally lifted her eyes to him, her gaze steady, fearless, and unshakable, a smile forming on her lips, not out of bitterness but out of strength, and in that moment everyone knew the night was no longer his, it was hers. The lights of the hall seemed to dim slightly, as if the universe itself wanted the spotlight only on her, and the silence between them became heavier than any words could hold. Quame, once the master of the evening, was now nothing but a trembling shadow before the queen he had tried to destroy. But what no one knew yet, what not even Quame could have imagined, was that this was only the beginning, for the truth Amara carried would shake his empire to its very foundations. And before the night was over, The man who thought he would shame his ex-wife would be the one left humiliated beyond repair. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Amara stood firm, her triplets clinging to her hands, their innocent smiles piercing through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. The glittering chandeliers above reflected off her radiant skin, casting a golden glow that made her presence impossible to ignore. Every guest in the hall, from politicians to business magnates, turned their eyes toward her with awe, unable to deny the power of her silent victory. Quame's carefully polished image cracked before them all, his face twisting as he struggled to regain control of the narrative slipping through his fingers. He had promised everyone a night of dominance, but instead he had handed them a story they would never forget, the return of the woman he abandoned, stronger and more glorious than ever. His voice trembled as he raised a glass, forcing out hollow words of welcome, but his hands shook so violently that wine splashed onto the marble floor, and whispers of mockery rose among the guests. Amara's lips curved into a faint smile, not of spite, but of triumph, because she knew she no longer needed to defend herself. Her success spoke louder than anything he could fabricate. She stepped forward slowly, her gown sweeping the floor like a wave of resilience, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and filled with the weight of truth. "Quame invited you all here tonight to watch me fall," she began, her words floating across the hall, silencing every murmur. "But look at me now. I stand not as a woman broken by betrayal, but as a mother, an entrepreneur, and a victor. What was meant to shame me has become the stage of my rebirth." Gasps echoed and some guests clapped quietly, while others nodded, their eyes shining with admiration. Quame tried to interrupt, but her gaze cut him down like lightning striking a dry tree, and he fell silent, unable to command the room that once obeyed him. Amara turned, addressing not just the hall but the cameras recording every second, knowing that by morning her story would travel far beyond these walls. Her voice softened, and yet its impact deepened, reaching into the hearts of everyone listening. If this story touches your soul, don't just watch in silence. Like this moment, share it with those who need hope, and subscribe so more African stories of resilience can rise to the world. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some even wiping tears, for they felt the weight of history being rewritten before their eyes. The applause rolled like thunder, and for the first time, Quame realized the empire he had built on pride was collapsing, brick by brick, in front of the very people whose respect he craved. He tried once more, shouting accusations about her past, claiming she had survived only because of luck, but the crowd no longer cared for his bitterness. One of the triplets tugged Amara's arm and said with childlike innocence, "Mama, why is he so angry when we are happy?" The room burst into laughter, not cruel but liberating, a laughter that stripped Quame of the last shred of power he held. His allies quietly slipped away, pretending not to know him, while journalists rushed closer to Amara, microphones extended, eager to capture every detail of her rise. She lifted her child into her arms, her smile glowing as she faced the cameras. "My empire was not built on luck," she declared firmly, "but on nights of tears, endless work, and unshakable faith. I was told I could never stand again, but here I am not just standing, but soaring." Her words echoed like prophecy, and in that moment the hall no longer belonged to Quame, it belonged to her children, and to every woman who had been told she could not rise again. Quame sank into a chair, his head in his hands, watching as everything he had built unraveled, not because Amara destroyed him, but because he had underestimated her strength. The investors he had hoped to impress now gathered around Amara, offering deals, admiration, and respect, their eyes lighting up with visions of her future. No one wanted to be associated with a man drowning in his own arrogance. They wanted to be aligned with the queen who had turned betrayal into power. The music shifted, a soft African rhythm filling the air as the band played again, this time in her honor. Guests lined up to greet her, to shake her hand, to take pictures with her triplets, whose laughter became the symbol of hope that night. Outside, the black Rolls Royce gleamed like a crown waiting to be placed on her head, the ultimate statement of her independence and success. As Amara finally walked out, holding her children close, flashes from cameras lit the night, immortalizing the moment for generations to come. Headlines were already forming in the minds of the journalists. The woman who rose from ashes. Triplets of triumph. Quame's humiliation turns into Amara's coronation. And in every whispered retelling of the night, one truth would remain unshakable. The man who planned to shame his ex-wife had ended up shaming himself, while the woman he abandoned had become an icon. In the back seat of her car, Amara looked at her children, their small faces glowing with joy, and whispered, "We did it. Not just for us, but for every woman who needs to know she can rise again." The chauffeur closed the door gently, and the Rolls Royce pulled away into the glittering night, leaving behind the ruins of Quame's pride. The city streets hummed with energy, stories spreading like wildfire, and Amara leaned back, finally at peace. She had won not just the battle of tonight, but the war for her future. Her story had become larger than her pain, a beacon of resilience for all who would hear it, and the sound of her children's laughter reminded her that she was never truly alone. The trap had turned into a throne, the shame into a crown, and the woman once forgotten had become unforgettable.